For today's Talking Back to Suicide, I'm going to begin poetically. However, before I do that, I'm going to introduce myself. So, my name is Dr. Diane Kaufman. You can call me Diana for my creative self. I'm a poet, artist, Humanism and Medicine awardee, retired child psychiatrist, and the founder director of the Hold On campaign for suicide prevention that uses the power of art to educate, connect, express, and heal. And I'm with my co host, Kino Isaac, coming to us from South Africa, who is a DJ, music producer, entrepreneur, and a mental health advocate for independent artists. So, getting back to poetry, I'd like to begin with a poem by Emily Dickinson. It's Hope is the Thing with Feathers, written in 1862. I asked myself, was Emily in need of hope and why? When these words arose from within her and then took flight, reaching so many, even today, right now. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. And with that poetic inspiration, Emily, Kino, and I want to introduce today's special guest, Dr. Dan Tomasulo, a world renowned expert on hope and positive psychology. Dr. Tomasulo is the academic director and core faculty at the Spirituality Mind Body Institute at Teachers College, Columbia University in New York City. He holds a PhD in psychology, an MFA in writing, and a Master of Applied Positive Psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. I would say he is a Renaissance man with creative gifts, also in playwriting, psychodrama, and creative nonfiction. His second memoir, published in 2018, American Snake Pit, Hope, Grit, and Resilience on the Wake of Willowbrook, was on the infamous treatment center. The screenplay for American Snake Pit has won countless international awards. Formerly the director of the New York City Certification in Positive Psychology, the New York Open Center, Dr. Tomasulo is also a review editor for Frontiers in Psychology, special section Positive Psychology. He was recognized and honored by ShareCare as a top 10 online influencer on depression. Author of the 2020 book, Learned Hopefulness, Dr. Tomasulo's most recent book, The Positivity Effect, Simple CBT Skills to Transform Anxiety and Negativity into Optimism and Hope, was published June 2023 by New Harbinger Publications. So we are very delighted, Dr. Tomasulo, to welcome you to Talking Back to Suicide.
Well, the honor is mine, Diana. Thank you so much for asking me here.
Oh my goodness, the world is in need of hope on a global scale, as well as us individually, right?
True.
With Emily's poem, right? I love the poet Emily Dickinson. And yet, I wonder about that poem, but I want to know what you think of it, because the ending of it is that hope never asks a crumb from us, that it's constantly singing, right? As a metaphor for, I don't know, the hopeful human spirit or the life force. And yet there's anxiety, depression, 11th leading cause of death in the United States is suicide. It's a global, I would say, pandemic, suicide. What are your thoughts? Or maybe you could start sharing about hope, suicide.
Yeah. First of all, I think Emily Dickinson cut through the core. You know, Freud said it best, right? He says, "Wherever I go, I see that the poets have been there before me,"
Yes.
right?
Uh-huh.
And I actually use that poem as the opening for the book, Learned Hopefulness. And what I think is important is a line buried within that poem that I think many people kind of skip over, but it's really the centerpiece. It basically says that hope is perched on your soul, right? And all the things I'm going to talk about today has to do with the neuroprotective elements of a transcendent relationship and the prevention of suicide. Most people don't know or uh, wouldn't assume that having a spiritual core that's activated and that a relationship with something greater than you is actually the greatest intervention for protection against suicide known in all of psychology, all of psychiatry. It doesn't matter what they've come up with in terms of resilience. The one characteristic that shows up over and over again is if somebody has a relationship with something greater than them. So when Emily Dickinson puts in her poem that true hope is perched on the soul, she got it right. I don't know if she had read the neuroscience or was just seeing the future, but she certainly did get it right. And I think that's where hope and spirituality linked together. I'm very fortunate to be at the Spirituality Mind Body Institute here at Teachers College Columbia, where its founder, Dr. Lisa Miller, has written extensively and researched extensively the neuroprotective elements of transcendence and really what we're calling a relational spirituality. That when you have a direct connection with your existence, with trying to appreciate and understand the vastness of what's out there, and the fact that, as Einstein said, God doesn't play dice with the universe. There are rules, there's order, there's something out there. When you can have a relationship with that that's personal, something happens in your brain that, in essence, no other thing does. We get a neuroproliferation of a specific area in the brain that actually grows once people start to have ongoing transcendent relationships. And it happens to be the area of the brain that is thinnest in people with an extremely high risk for depression. So if you take a look at families where depression runs in families and they're at very high risk of suicide or risky behavior and those kind of things, you come to find out in a longitudinal study that those who have a transcendent relationship actually get a thicker brain in that area, and that's a very new finding. That's only within the last 10 years that we've found that. And there's more to that, but it's like there's something about hope that comes in the same package as spiritual growth and development. So those two things are linked together.
Could you say, Jan, a little bit more about what that relationship is or how a person practices that or experiences that? Even maybe talking about early childhood development, what parents can do to help foster that?
Well, you're asking like these are the kind of questions my students ask. I say, ask any question you want. Then they ask a question that's got 15 parts to it, right?
I know.
So let me just take a step back
Sure.
and talk a little bit about where I think my work fits in with all of this and the
Mhm.
kind of things that we've discovered and focused on. Um, One of the things that happens when you have hope as a central focus, right? When you try to focus on hope, you recognize that we're in the middle between positive psychology and transcendence, right? So it's great to do things that help you feel good. But when there's a lot of stuff in the world that's not good, now we start adding a few other things in, like how do you build resilience? How do you cultivate that? How do you cultivate things like optimism, hope, faith? How do you do all those things? And to be fair about it, there's a lot of confusion about what's the difference, as an example, between hope, faith, and optimism. They're
Yeah.
three completely separate things. They have overlap, but optimism is in a general sense that things are good or going to be good. Um, Hope is when you have a sense of agency about making things good. So if somebody says, "I think tomorrow's going to be a good day," that's optimism. If they say, "What can I do to make tomorrow a good day?" That's hope. So agency becomes the vehicle of understanding where hope is. But when you get to faith, faith is like, I'm not sure what my agency is. I'm not sure about my belief system. Something else is going to take care of tomorrow. So when you combine them together, the focus becomes, what can I do? What can I do to make tomorrow as good as possible, to make the rest of today as good as possible? What kind of energy can I bring to this moment that I'm in control over, right? Because we have so much out there that we're not in control, so that it gets whittled down. When we get inside of that aspect, your agency, this is pretty much where I spend my life these days, is sort of, how do you teach hope? Right? How do you teach hope that is the bridge between psychological well-being and relational spirituality? How do you build that hope? And here's a few things that I've learned. Hope is the only positive emotion that requires negativity or uncertainty, requires it to be activated. So if you take a look at something like joy, another positive emotion, you don't need anything negative to trigger it off. It can be spontaneously activated by an event or an experience or even a memory. With hope, something uncertain or negative has to be present. Otherwise, there'd be no need for hope, right? This goes all the way back to the Greeks.
I was thinking about Pandora's box, right?
Right.
And all the
She
negativity, and hope is
they
at the bottom.
they got it right. They got it right. And she closes the jar to keep hope in. And the metaphor for that from the positive psychology angle, certainly my angle on it, is that hope lived with all the maladies of the world. It was friends with all of them. And so it understood how to dismantle and work with them, right? So hope is kept back because it knew all of these negativities or uncertainties with true intimacy. So hope becomes a transformational entity, a transformational emotion. This is important because if you try to understand it as a standalone positive emotion, you're going to be in trouble because it doesn't operate like joy or bliss or any of those, gratitude. That doesn't operate like that. You need to have something that's coming against it that it responds to. So let me give you a metaphor. If you look at things like water, wind, and sun, these are natural forces that are unbelievably destructive. Wind can create tornadoes that kills and destroys property and lives. Water can create a flood that does the same kind of destruction. And sun can create skin cancer, drought, all these kinds of things. However, if you're ready for them, if you build a windmill, if you have a turbine so that at the waterfall, the water can turn the turbine. If you create a solar panel, the same incredibly destructive force becomes something immeasurably positive. So hope is in that space of learning how to take the negative energy that's there, and energy is a good way to describe it, right? The negative elements that are there, and finding ways to transform them. Um, and in that regard, I have found, and this isn't universal by any means. I've got, piles of research and things that suggest it's likely to be right, but this has, so take it with a grain of salt. But from a decade of trying to teach very capable graduate students how to cultivate hope, what I've learned is you can't put that on the front burner. You can't say, listen, by next week, I want you to have more hope. It's too much of a stretch from wherever people are at to just try and grasp the concept and figure out how to respond. So I've laid it out in a timeline that becomes very doable. And the timeline is kind of simplistic, right? We have the past, we have the present, and the future, right? And other positive psychologists don't necessarily think about it this way, but I certainly do, is that we have interventions that are important about the past, interventions that are important about the present, and interventions that are important about the future. And it's important to think of timelines, because when you get to things like forgiveness, it's always about the past, right? You're not going to forgive something that's yet to come. You have an experience, and if you don't forgive, you'll get jammed up there, right? Pride is another example. Pride is about something you've already accomplished, you've already completed. Well, in that category, the one that works the best for leading to hope is to look at the gratitude in your life. If you really want to start a transcendent relationship and a hopeful way of seeing the world, you begin with what you've already experienced in life. And what that means is that I start off with teaching people how to think about yesterday. What are three good things that happened yesterday that you have gratitude for? Now, that sounds simple, but the minute you go to do that, you're activating something in your brain called the default mode the default mode network. It's better said that way, where you're doing a cognitive search for yesterday, right? What happened yesterday? What happened yesterday? And typically what the brain does is the brain does like what a Google search does. If I type into my search engine, how do you cook fish? I'll get literally a billion answers, but none of them might be what I'm looking for. I'll just get the ones that other people have asked, or the things that are most recent, or the most requested way of cooking fish. But if I specifically go into that search engine and I ask, how do you cook tuna fish on an open barbecue? Now my memory is pinpointed. It changes how my brain works. It changes where I go looking for the information. I'm not just, if I think about yesterday, some good, some bad, some this and that, it gets lumped into a big average. But if I ask specifically, how do you cook tuna fish? Or really, what did you do yesterday that had gratitude? All of a sudden, this gratitude comes up, and now that becomes the way my brain searches for yesterday. When people do this over time, it changes your default mode network, which is what we all want to do, is to be able to think about the good things. We're not ignoring the bad things. We're just not underplaying the good. Or in that billion answers of how to cook fish, there was something in there about the tuna fish, but I'd have to go through all the other stuff. So simple ways of harvesting positivity that's already existed, that hasn't been given the full highlight that it should, allows people to become more present in a positive way. So we started in the past because it's the easiest hanging fruit in positive psychology. Good stuff has already happened. Let's go back and reclaim it. harvest it, take it, squeeze the juice out of that experience so that when we do, we're savoring, we're now holding on to something that was genuinely positive, savoring it. And what that does is it brings our sensorium, brings our way of thinking, brings our way of being right into the moment. Um, Now, once we're in the moment, now we have other interventions. So things like what's called dispositional mindfulness. Um, uh, what's happening to me right now? And what are some good things that are happening to me right now? Things like flow. When is it that I kind of lose track with what I'm doing because I'm so engaged? When does that happen? Uh, and so we start to recognize that using our character strengths, that using our mindful disposition, by broadening our awareness, by moving into flow, we become more deeply embedded in the present. So now the gratitude has given way to things like kindness, which is very present oriented, love, very present oriented, and we're now doing good things. So one is remembering good things, then doing good things. And then we start to lean into the future. Because if you are remembering good things and doing good things, you start anticipating the future in a very different way. And the very different way is that you start asking yourself, what is it I can do to make tomorrow better? Well, I already have a lot of positivity in my thinking. So I start looking through life with a lens that's maybe a little cleaner, maybe not filled with as much despair. I've actually just written it's I do a lot of writing, so it's not published yet, but it's something called negatively oriented therapy. It's that people are too happy. What would we do if we wanted to make them a little bit more depressed and anxious? Well, we would use the same, we'd have them think about bad things from the past, right? We'd think about everything in the present that's not good, and we'd anticipate bad things happening in the future, and voila, we'd have it. So, this formula for cultivating hope really emphasizes the fact that our past, present, and future are linked together. And the way that you train people to teach them how to be more hopeful is you teach them how to be grateful first, how to be more kind and more loving in the present moment, how to be more mindful in the present moment. And that starts leaning them into the future in a specific way.
Wow, thank you. Have you always been of that disposition yourself?
It depends on who you ask. Uh, Let me say this. I think my temperament has always been on the positive side. But actually, the thing that, and I was a trauma specialist, I guess you'd call it. And so I developed all kinds of programs and worked with people with horrific traumas in their life and people with intellectual and psychiatric disabilities who didn't have the cognitive wherewithal to respond to various setbacks in life. And so I was very deeply immersed in that until I went through my own trauma. So it's one thing to be, there's a Spanish proverb that says it's one thing to talk about bulls than to be in the bull ring. And so I was great talking about trauma. But when I went through it and I had a life and death traumatic experience, and I could not shake it. And I had the list of all the symptoms, and it's like, oh yeah, well, I've got every one of these. And I knew the people, I had access, I had resources, and I literally went through every single thing on that list, and nothing shook it. And I was stunned. The whole range, nothing shifted it at all. And a very dear friend of mine, my best friend, in fact, was becoming a positive psychologist back then. And he said, why don't we go to the first International Positive Psychology Association meeting? He says, because you're miserable and you need something. And, when you're miserable, you don't want to do anything. So I did not want to go. I said, I don't want to be around 2,000 positive psychologists. And I definitely don't want to see the people from Norway. I'm gonna lash out at them because they're always so happy about everything. He ignored me, brought me there, and by that time, I was struggling with full tilt PTSD. Had been in treatment for a full year with nothing putting a dent in it. I had to get extra supervision for trying to maintain my practice. It was extremely difficult. And when I went there, and I, I listened to the research, and I was like, they got to be kidding me. If a tenth of what they're talking about is true, psychology is on the verge of a new dawn. This is going to change everything and everybody. And I went home and I did basically. I started the gratitude thing. I went home. What are three good things that happened yesterday? And I thought it's like a pea shooter trying to deal with a tank. I couldn't do. And all of a sudden, within 30 days of doing incredibly simple things about trying to appreciate my existence a little more and my life a little more and harvesting the positivity from the past, I transitioned, and then I became fascinated because it was all the standard treatments for PTSD. And believe me, what I can tell you, I had top people, all the best interventions, and none of it did what the positive stuff had done. Then I became fascinated, and I had already had a bunch of degrees, and I had no need to go back to school, but I wanted to go because I wanted to really learn about this. And when I got there, Marty Seligman said I was the first psychologist and psychodramatist writer, to come into the program. And I said, why'd you let me in? And he says, well, you're not a normal psychologist. And so I think that's a compliment because
Mhm.
after I graduated, he invited me to join the faculty. I became his assistant. A few years later, from me talking so much, I got my daughter involved. So we're the first legacy folks to come through and be Marty's assistants. First ones through the program together. She's got a doctorate as well. And so now we do that work together. We do some research together, and it's been extremely transformative. And I would not have said I was a spiritual person per se. I think I was spiritual but not religious, as they say. Um, but once I got deeply involved with positive psychology, Marty connected me here with Columbia. I started designing the positive psychology courses, and then about 5, 6 years ago now, I became the director of the program, and it was like, oh my goodness, what we're all studying in well-being really leads to transcendence. And so then just became fascinated in trying to understand that connection, and hope, luckily, fit right in the
Mhm.
middle of all of that.
Thank you for sharing all that. Kino, I know you're there. What are your thoughts?
Well, firstly, I never knew there was such a thing as a positive psychologist. So I love it. We learn something new um, every day. So, Dr. Den, I know we don't have much time with you. So I've drawn a diagram here, with faith, hope, optimism, and always try to be realistic, and be like the average human on the street now who's battling with mental illness, anxiety, depression, whatever you want to label it. So, scenario, I wake up in the morning, I got this vision for my life. I'm optimistic and I got faith. Now there's hope. And you mentioned agency. Now, agency is going out there and actually taking those actionable steps, that's going to make whatever I want to happen. Now, we know in life at times you can go down one road taking these steps and then it doesn't work out, you know. So my way of thinking is like, okay, I don't change the goal, I just need to change how I'm going about it. But there's so many people out there that just get so demotivated when they're in the agency part of the process, and then they automatically lose faith, lose optimism, lose hope. So what do you do in that situation?
Well, first of all, I love the question. I think it was beautifully articulated because that's the real question. We can do all these other things about concepts, but the real question is, what do you do when the feces hits the oscillator, as we say? So, um, a way to think about it is that the core trait, and I'm very, very lucky. Right here in our department is Dr. George Bonanno, really the lead researcher on trauma and resilience, right? And George and I have had some wonderful conversations because hope and resilience, they're different things, right? But they inform each other in different ways. So I want you to just focus with me on the agency part, right? And you said something in your question that I would really challenge, right? You said, "Oh, I don't change the goal; I change how I get there." That's old hope theory. That's Snyder's theory about agency, pathway, and goals. Good for what it was, but it's only a cognitive theory. Meaning it only has to do with how you think about things and your goals and how do you get there. And for all the wonderful things that theory and Snyder did with that, the thing to remember is that that was all done before they studied character strengths. It was all done before positive psychology was involved. So they were just looking at hope as an entity, but as a cognitive structure. So for all the fabulous work that came from that, right now, anybody who's studying hope would kind of see that as a good start, but certainly not filled with all the things that we know since then, the 20 plus years that have added to that. So agency is still very important. But what we've learned from Bonanno's research, what we've learned from Kraft's work, is that it's the flexibility in thinking that really will help you get through. A metaphor for this is that if I'm a stream and I'm flowing and I'm going along and I'm making my plan about where I'm going to go, and then there's a big rock in the stream, I don't freak out because there's a rock. I literally go right around it. There's a fluidity, a type of flexibility that comes from a hardship, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is um, all the research that we now know about how people can be activated with hope has to do with changing the goal as part of the flexibility. And what I mean by that is, you know, I wrote my book Learned Hopefulness in 2020, right? It came out in 2020 at the very beginning of the pandemic. So if there's any authors out there, I don't recommend writing and releasing a book during a worldwide pandemic, unless it's on hope. I was surprised at the sales. I was surprised at the interest, but it made sense because everybody was like, we need hope, you know? And one of the first things that we did is we started to talk about flexibility and rethinking goals. Because what the pandemic taught everybody is that your goals may need to change in order for you to have hope. And so this is the first time we talked about a recalibration of goals. So people that said, I'm going to do 2 million in sales this year. No, maybe you're going to do 200,000 in sales this year. If you keep the 2 million thing, the gap between where you're at and what you want to do is going to keep making you feel miserable. So one of the first things we do is recalibrate a goal, and then we make it into what I call micro goals. One of the biggest takeaways that happened was that people needed to be flexible, but they also needed to have micro goals where, what am I going to do in the next 20 minutes? I'm not concerned with how I'm going to, finish graduate school or, where I'm going to go next week what am I going to do in the next 20 minutes in terms of answering maybe 3 emails or making phone calls? The second you have a micro goal, now you've got agency, right? You've got the goal that we're talking, you've got all of those things, and you've got a very, very direct, clear pathway that's opened up. So we squeeze it down into something that's bite size. And what happens is hope at the end of the day is bi-directional. And what I mean by that is that if I have a little bit of energy, zest, enthusiasm for a goal, and I go out and I achieve that goal, the achievement of that goal gives me a dopamine boost. It gives me feedback that says, hey, you could still do this. I hit that goal, it fills me right back up. And guess what I want? I want to do another goal. That's what Barbara Fredrickson calls the upward spiral, right? Because now the bidirectional nature of hope is that I'm learning how to give out, get something done, grab it back, fill me up, do it again, and do it again. Now, hope has been taught because somebody is flexible in their thinking, flexible in their timeline, flexible in their goal. And when you put that together, they have a genuine pathway forward.
Dan, it made me think as you were speaking, that expression, never give up. Right?
Yes, yeah.
But listening to what you just said, I was thinking, oh, it's about never give up hope.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's it. That's it. Martin Luther King's quotes are really fabulous for this because, he says we can have finite disappointment, but we need to have infinite hope, right?
Hope, yeah.
Right. And I couldn't agree more.
So I know, Dan, that you need to be leaving in a few moments to teach a class.
Teach a
right?
class on hope. Who knew? Who knew?
We would love to invite you back again if that might accommodate your schedule.
It'd be my pleasure. Thank you.
Yes. And how can our listeners learn more about you, your program, and the field of positive psychology?
Oh, that's great. Well, my website is probably the easiest access, and it's just my name, DanTomasulo, DanTomasulo.com. And on there, I have something called, oddly enough, the Hope Habits blog, and so you can sign up for that. And what I try to do is once a month, I take a look at some of the research that is happening and write about it. We've had very exciting time in positive psychology and in hope, where lots of new things are coming out all the time. I try to stay on top of that, and then I try to write about that and give people some new tools. So that's probably the easiest way. And then there's ways on that website to get in touch with me if you'd like.
Thank you so much. I know that my hope meter is at 100% plus right now. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for inviting me, both of you. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye, Dan.